Welcome to the Walrus Talks Opioids, presented by Addictions and Mental Health Ontario. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus and your host for this evening. We are thrilled to be here in person in Toronto and streaming live online at thewalrus.ca. Hello and welcome to over 500 households who are registered for the live stream. To our in-person audience, can we give them a warm welcome? Online, we have audience members tuning in from all over Canada. This includes Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, Regina, and Sudbury. Also, we have people watching from around the world. Hello, Mumbai, Los Angeles, Seattle, Phoenix, and Istanbul. Also, welcome to everyone who is here with us at the theater. Tonight, we encourage you to take notes or photos and share your favorite moments and any takeaways on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus on your favorite platform and use the hashtag Walrus Talks. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At the Walrus, we're honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling, working with Indigenous contributors, and we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from this evening. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada in a variety of formats for those inside and outside the country. From tariffs to taunts of becoming the 51st state, Canada is the conversation, and this middle power is standing strong. We are responding to the moment with facts, analysis, and even some humor, which is a Canadian tradition. You can find The Walrus online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands or by subscribing. You can also listen to our podcasts and our stories online or take part in events like this one. This work is fiercely independent, and it's powered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. Thank you all for being here for this important conversation, and to Addictions and Mental Health Ontario for partnering with us on this event. Addictions and Mental Health Ontario represents nearly 150 organizations delivering frontline addiction, substance youth health, and mental health services in community and hospital settings across Ontario. They lead policy, advocacy, and system improvement efforts to help build a more accessible, comprehensive, and connected system of care across the province. To tell us more, please welcome to the stage Jennifer Holmes-Weir.
Thanks and good evening, everyone. It's so great to see so many of you here and to know that so many people have joined us online. To those of you who are not at the Addictions and Mental Health Ontario conference today, it's a pleasure to join you this evening for this important conversation. And so on behalf of AMHO, as we are affectionately known, I want to thank you for joining us and gathering tonight. At AMHO, our team works closely with our members, government partners and allies, and partners right across the sector to help build a system of healthcare that provides profound support to those who need it. Achieving that goal requires honest conversations, strong partnerships, and a willingness to tackle complex challenges head-on. It's especially true when we think about issues like the opioid crisis. For years, Ontario's opioid crisis has impacted communities in profound ways. It has reminded us that there are no simple or one-size-fits-all solutions. Informed by lived experience, grounded in evidence, and responsive to the realities of communities in all parts of Ontario, progress will depend on our willingness and ability to come together, share perspectives, and advance solutions that are at both once practical and ambitious. Together, we can ensure people have access to the care and support they need, where and when they need it. And that's exactly what tonight is all about. It's about creating space for dialogue, for learning, for connection, and for building the kind of shared understanding that leads to better outcomes for individuals, families, and communities. Meaningful change does not happen in isolation. It happens when people come together. And so I'd like to thank the team at the Walrus and the incredible speakers who have come together with AMHO this evening to help advance our call. Dr. Jennifer Brasch, Chris Cull, Rennie Linklater, Mayor Marianne Meed Ward, Scott Menzies, Suzanne Obiorah, and Ahmad Salhia. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the perspectives you'll share with us. And thank all of you for your continued efforts to help transform lives affected by the opioid crisis across Ontario. Thanks for your interest, your engagement, and your commitment to being part of the conversation. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Jennifer, CEO of AMHO, Addictions and Mental Health Ontario, and a leader in this work. Tonight, we have 7 speakers with 7 minutes each to examine the intersectional nature of the challenges faced by people with opioid use disorder. Our talkers will share evidence-based strategies for tackling the opioid crisis, as well as proven policy solutions that can help those who need it the most. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Dr. Jennifer Brasch, Lead Addiction Psychiatry, St. Joseph's Healthcare, Hamilton. Suzanne Obiorah, Chief Executive Officer, Somerset West Community Health Center. Rennie Linklater, PhD, Senior Director, Shkaabe, Makwa, CAMH. Ahmad Salhia, Superintendent, Executive Services, York Regional Police. Mayor Marianne Meed Ward, Mayor, City of Burlington. Scott Menzies, Founder, Hard Hat Support, CEO, the Coding Inspector, as well as Chris Cull, Founder, Inspire by Example, filmmaker, healthcare worker, and mental health and addictions motivational speaker. A round of applause. Thank you all for joining us.
People use drugs to escape reality. If you've taken an opioid like morphine for severe, acute pain, like a kidney stone or a broken leg, you know that opioids give a sensation of well-being, that all is right in the world. Your broken leg still hurts, but it doesn't matter. Some people impulsively try an opioid, like Percocet or Dilaudid, just to experience that sense of well-being. Most can stop, but some start using opioids again and again because they like or need that sensation. Tolerance develops quickly, and with repeated use, it soon takes larger amounts of the opioid to capture the same euphoria. As a person becomes tolerant, they develop withdrawal symptoms if they do not use. Withdrawal is not dangerous, but the severe nausea and vomiting, body aches, restlessness, insomnia, and cravings are horrible. Desperate to avoid withdrawal, a person will use whatever opioids they can get. Their life becomes caught up in a relentless cycle of doing what they need to obtain money, the purchase and use of opioids, a brief period of temporary relief, some sleep, and then the withdrawal starts again. At some point, many people using opioids turn to fentanyl, a high-potency opioid. That means there is a very small difference between the amount that causes euphoria and the amount that stops a person from breathing, which can be fatal. On the streets, fentanyl is sold as down and often of unknown potency because it is cut with substances that may be addictive or toxic. Using an unpredictable dose of a potent opioid like fentanyl carries a high risk of death. The hazards of using down are obvious, with the recent reports of record numbers of paramedic calls for opioid overdoses in cities across Ontario. The government's plans to close 7 supervised consumption sites will result in more deaths. I'm Dr. Jennifer Brasch. I'm an addiction psychiatrist at St. Joe's in Hamilton and an associate professor at McMaster. I treat patients with addictions in 3 different clinics. There's too much to talk about, so I'll speak from my perspective as a physician about people with opioid use disorder who want treatment. Addiction can be defined as a treatable, chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. It's important that the first adjective is treatable. I'll come back to that. People with opioid use disorder, like other addictions, use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and continue despite harmful consequences. These harms can include physical or mental problems, the inability to fulfill obligations at home, work, or school, damage to relationships, and loss of involvement in social, recreational, or occupational activities. These harms affect not only the user, but also the community and the people around them. Opioids are used not only to escape from physical pain, but to escape from emotional pain, the relentless stresses of homelessness, the agony of being trapped in an abusive relationship, or severe psychiatric symptoms like the flashbacks, panic attacks, hypervigilance, and nightmares of post-traumatic stress disorder. I have not met a woman using IV opioids who did not suffer severe abuse in childhood. Deaths from opioid overdose have increased dramatically in the past decade, with a sharp spike during the COVID pandemic. 7,289 people in Canada died from ingestion of toxic opioids in 2024. Every one of these deaths is a tragedy, and I expect that most people here tonight grieve someone lost to an opioid overdose. But deaths due to toxic ingestions are only one of the life-limiting harms. People with opioid addiction have much greater risks of illnesses like cancer, cardiovascular, and liver diseases, as well as life-limiting experiences, including violence and homelessness. Opioid addiction can shorten a person's life by over 25 years. I defined addiction as a treatable condition. How does one recover? The process starts with not dying. You've probably heard of naloxone, an opioid antagonist that can reverse a toxic overdose if administered quickly after a person stops breathing. That's life-saving, but it's not recovery. When a person is ready to stop using, prescription methadone and Suboxone are opioids that prevent withdrawal without causing euphoria. There are many clinics dedicated just to prescribing these medications. Starting opioid agonist therapy is crucial, but it's only one step towards recovery. Many people have urgent medical or dental problems, need to be tested for HIV or hepatitis, need help to apply for social assistance, or get off the street. Most clinics for people with opioid addiction do not offer help with any of that. Many who have been using substances to cope need addiction treatment through counseling or therapeutic groups, day programs, or bedded services. Some need psychiatric care, since 90% of people with opioid use disorder have another mental health condition, and many also have other addictions. We have effective evidence-based talk therapies like learning relapse prevention strategies or emotion regulation skills. However, these treatments can be often difficult, if not impossible, to access, with separate applications or referrals, long wait lists, or high costs. Recovery involves working to improve one's health and to live a meaningful life, involved in and connected to the community. The gaps in our system make that so hard to achieve. People with opioid use disorder need to be able to start Suboxone or methadone quickly, as soon as they're motivated to make changes. They need clinics that are welcoming and provide access to needed supports and services, in addition to meds. We need an integrated system so that it's straightforward to quickly access addiction treatment and psychiatric care. What can you do? Recognize the social determinants of health that trap a person in addiction. Reject the stigma that's a barrier to recovery. Get an naloxone kit. Provide hope and non-judgmental support to anyone you know with an addiction who's ready to make changes, because people are in recovery when they no longer need to escape from reality. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Obiorah, and I'm the CEO of Somerset West Community Health Centre in Ottawa. And I'm also a proud board member with Addictions and Mental Health Ontario. And I enter this conversation as a leader of an organization that was running a consumption and treatment service for 8 years. This was a space where individuals in our community can use substances with supervision. And we were directed to close that service and transition to become a homelessness, addiction, and recovery treatment hub, or Heart Hub, in the spring of 2025. And on the cusp of learning 2 weeks ago that all provincially funded consumption and treatment services will close in June 2026, I believe we are living through a fracture in our social contract. Each day at our center, we witness the effects of a toxic drug supply. We see it in our sidewalks. We feel it in community conversations shaped by both compassion and frustration. We hear it when someone says, "I'm not heartless, I'm scared." And we sense it in the quiet exhaustion of people who are trying to hold a community together. We are living in a time of public fatigue where systems are stretched and too many conversations collapse into anger before they reach solutions. And perhaps what makes this moment so difficult amid the division, fatigue, and uncertainty is the apathy, and how that apathy can start to look efficient, reducing a segment of the population to a problem that needs to be moved along. Central to the discussions have been perceptions and experiences of safety. So let's start there. Not with ideology, not with polarization, but perhaps with mutual understanding. Can we agree that public safety must be big enough to hold everyone? To include not only the absence of disorder, but the presence of stability, the presence of predictability, and the conditions needed to experience a good quality of life. When we talk about safety, are we talking about safety inclusive of those experiencing homelessness and a substance use challenge? For years, supervised consumption services were one part of the safety response. They created connections. They prevented drug poisoning. They opened doors to care and kept people alive long enough to have a next chapter. And it gave us something else, a front row street to the complexity. Because what drug toxicity exposes brutally is that you cannot treat a poisoned supply with moral judgment. You cannot arrest your way out of trauma, and you cannot detox someone into a home that doesn't exist. Now, Ontario is shifting towards heart hubs, bringing primary care, addiction treatment, mental health supports, and housing pathways together in one model. And there is promise here. Heart hubs aim to reduce fragmentation, to stop sending people from door to door. They focus on treatment and recovery, and they attempt to respond to public concerns about visibility and safety. They invest in housing stability, and that matters. Our Heart Hub will house 50 individuals this spring and wrap those individuals with 24/7 supports that they need to achieve housing stability. This model does have potential for a segment of the population, and there is a tension of scale as at least 550 individuals in Ottawa are living unsheltered with substance use challenges. To mend our social contract is to create a holistic system offering a spectrum of supports across a continuum of care. That is what the evidence shows us. Not because one philosophy, Heart Hubs, has won over another, consumption and treatment services, but because real people need different doors at different times for support. In this social fracture, I worry that desperate times have now called for desperate measures. This moment asks more of us than the urgency through one solution to address a toxic drug crisis. We are being called to meet this moment not only as a moral challenge, but as an economic and equity test of whether we are prepared to build systems equal to the need. We are being called for mature leadership in resisting false choices and holding many truths at once. Safety matters. Care matters. Recovery matters. And dignity must remain at the center of all three. We cannot accept any trade-offs here. Perhaps the desperation has tempted quick fixes, but the real opportunity lies in resisting what is immediate in favor for what is structural and sustained over time. Roughly 90 days from now, all provincially funded consumption and treatment services will close, and yet people will still use substances. This calls for coordination, not polarization. And as the province is moving in a new direction, we collectively are tasked with implementing a responsible transition. It means municipalities, health services, housing partners, outreach teams, community organizations, and government are sitting at one table and asking, how do we build policy that holds complexity, provide care that meets people where they are, and foster community that refuses to trade one group's safety for another group's survival? Each person in this room has a role in what comes next, because this moment is asking something larger of all of us. It is asking for how we can build toward a model that is more connected, more humane, and more effective for the people most at risk and for the communities who are counting on us. Notwithstanding the task ahead, I remain hopeful because if this crisis reveals the strain in our systems, it also reveals the possibility. The solutions of treatment, of housing, of integration, and collaboration are not beyond us. The task before us includes the political will, the courage, the coordination, and the scale of supports required to adequately respond. So in that vein, I do not believe hope is solely a sentiment. I believe with hope, it becomes discipline. And hope also becomes our refusal to accept visible suffering, to accept preventable death, or to accept fragmented care as the best that we can do. And hope is the choice to keep building patiently, seriously, and together toward communities that are safer, more humane, and more equitable to the need before us. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rennie Linklater. I'm from Rainy River First Nations, also known as Manitou Rapids, in the traditional territory of Treaty Number 3 in northwestern Ontario, and I also serve as Senior Director of Shkaabe Makwa at CAMH. As I'm standing here with all of you this evening, both in the room and those of you who have joined us across the country, I stand here in the space that we are addressing the opiate crisis. And when I think about how this crisis has emerged for different people, there's different journeys that have brought people into this place. In some ways, people have got there because they've needed an opiate to help them get through an injury or a surgery. Some people have found opiates because it's have provided relief for their emotional pain. Opiates are great pain relievers. And I really believe that we've come to this because we have such a crisis, a global crisis in humanity, that people are really trying to escape. They're trying to escape their circumstances. They're trying to escape their pain. And so for those of us that are working within the system, it's requiring us to think differently, to do things different, to be kind, to be compassionate, and to be very resourceful in working within a system that is so hard to shift and expand. And in these last years, myself and my family have been very impacted by this crisis. I first lost an aunt who lived in Thunder Bay. I happened to be landing in Thunder Bay for work meetings at the time my cousin called me to say that her mom was being taken up to Thunder Bay Regional Hospital. Over the weekend, we sat with her while she was unconscious with a blood infection as she was dying. I held my phone and I played powwow music for her with her eyes closed, sometimes her heart not even beating, until her lung took a breath, and then it would start her life again. And then within a couple of years, my cousin Amy died, my Aunt Darlene's daughter, also in Thunder Bay. She left 4 boys behind. She was a mom. And then my niece Christy died, leaving 2 boys behind at Manitou Rapids. And so this goes on and on and on in our communities. And it's not just the opiates, it's suicide, and it's lack of our abilities to really be in a world and work through in a way where there can be kindness and support and recovery for everyone. And I think about the extensive unresolved grief in our families. And this really just compounds this pain. And I think what's really worrisome is when we really think about it and really start to understand the vast network and the infrastructure that is behind the drug crisis. Organized crime, gang-related activity, multiple intersections. We're reading in the media how young people are being groomed, coerced, forced into these roles. We saw last fall that 2 youth, a 15 and an 18-year-old from Brampton, were charged with second-degree murder of a teen in Ginogaming First Nation just south of Thunder Bay, a drug-related incident. We heard from the communities that those 2 youth were in other communities around that time as well. We know that a lot of people are being drawn into this, sometimes unknowingly. We have 4 young people right now in prison in Hong Kong because they traveled with packages that they believed were legitimate. And so when we think about where we're at now in this time of crisis, how is it that we draw people in? How is it that we be in this way, that we think about safety, that everybody deserves a chance to recover? Because as one of my colleagues has shared with me, we can't help someone if they've already passed on. And so for me, it's really about options. And I can say that in our communities, in First Nations communities, we have had a massive shift in how we're addressing these issues. And when our leaders first started to come together in the 70s to talk about the alcohol use and the problems that it was creating in our communities with family violence and the impacts on our children and family, we really moved forward with an abstinent model. And it stayed like that for decades. And what has happened in this last 10 to 15 years has been remarkable, because we've had whole communities and whole leaders shift the way that they are thinking, let go of these ideas that everybody needs to abstain, because that's not practical and that's not reality. And so now we have service providers and community-based agencies creating services, partnering with hospitals or hiring NPs, hiring addiction medicine doctors to be able to come in to offer mobile RAM clinics, to be able to offer food and supports, even if community members are riding around on bikes. They're being really creative in meeting our people where we're at. And so when I think about the cultural resources that are needed, we know we're in a system that really needs to be able to ignite that spirit of recovery. And there's another piece to this too, and I think it's much around safety, that sometimes we have to let go of this idea that everybody's journey is about recovery. Because what everybody's journey ought to be about is about safety. Miigwech. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ahmad Salhia. I'm a superintendent with York Regional Police, and thank you for having me here this evening to share my story here. I'm going to actually start off by talking about a human trafficking story. You know, back in 2008, I was a frontline police officer in the city of Vaughan, and I was very proactive. I was great at enforcement. I was great at arresting people. And I was the guy at the district, and I took a lot of pride in that. I was respected by my peers and my leaders. And of course, being 5 years on the job at the time, I knew everything. But clearly, I was immature at the time, and I was naive to a lot of issues. And I'll share a story with you where there was a young lady who I heard screaming and shouting at the back of the police station in our Criminal Investigations Bureau. She was in crisis. And I went back, and a bunch of officers were trying to calm her down and were trying to tell her with no compassion and with no respect that, hey, she had to go into the interview room. She was also a victim of the sex trade at the time. And she was addicted to drugs as well. And so I came in thinking, hey, I got this. I'm going to tell her what to do, and she's going to listen to me because I'm a police officer. And I'm going to direct her to go into the interview room, and she has to do what I say. With no compassion, with no respect. And let me tell you, that didn't work, and she bit back pretty hard, and I deserved it. And the lesson I learned from that shortly thereafter, that day, as we were all trying to figure out how to deal with the situation, because we weren't equipped, we weren't trained for it, there was a young officer who attended that day who was part of the human trafficking unit. He's actually the chief of police in London right now, Chief Tai Trung, who was at the forefront of human trafficking in 2008, 2009. And he came in, and he looked at her and he said to her, I'll never forget this. He said, I'm so sorry for what you're experiencing right now. What can I do right now to support you and to help you? What do you need from me? And in an instant, the temperature went from here to here, because he understood that as a victim of human trafficking, the behaviors that she was demonstrating were rooted in exploitation. They were rooted in sexual assault. They were rooted in addiction. Something that I didn't understand as a young officer, and I was very grateful for that lesson that I learned that day. And I share this story with you because I want to draw the parallels between that and substance use disorder. In 2008, 2009, there was a massive paradigm shift as it related to human trafficking, and our understanding fundamentally changed. The way we operated fundamentally changed as it related to victims of exploitation. And I'm here to tell you that that paradigm shift is happening today. We're in the midst of it as it relates to people with substance use disorder. And I'm going to share a little bit about that with you, specifically as it relates to enforcement. And I know that the word enforcement can be scary to some. I know it can be triggering. But enforcement today in 2026 is very different to what it was in 2003 when I started. Today, enforcement is about dedicating teams and units to tackle organized crime, to detect, disrupt, and dismantle these networks that have tentacles across the GTA, across the province, and across the country. Enforcement is about targeting dangerous, violent gang members and street offenders who are preying on the vulnerable, who suffer from substance use disorder, who are perpetuating the cycle of addiction. Enforcement today is systematically dismantling the entire hierarchy, not just the crime boss and those in between, but all of it: importers, exporters, wholesalers, street-level traffickers, co-conspirators, money launderers. Asset forfeiture in itself is incredibly complex. seizing proceeds of crime for homes and vehicles that are bought through illicit funds, including cryptocurrency. That's enforcement to us today. Enforcement is not about targeting the end user. And this is the shift that I'm trying to, that I'm hoping this audience can appreciate and support. It's not about targeting those who suffer through mental health, substance use disorder, and homelessness. That's not our job to deal with, and we recognize that. We recognize that we need to leverage the support and the expertise from people in this room. Our role as first responders is to provide and navigate pathways to treatment, mental health services, housing, recovery, and harm reduction. As first responders, we must ensure that we have effective responses that are evidence-informed, that are data-driven, that address health and social needs, but also balancing community safety and well-being. And that can be, I can tell you, an incredibly difficult task to balance. I want to share some numbers with you that help demonstrate this paradigm shift that I'm trying to explain. 10 years ago, in 2015, in the entire province of Ontario, police collectively laid 11,664 charges as it relates to simple possession of drugs. Last year, in 2025, about 27,000 officers in the province of Ontario collectively laid 2,593 charges. That's a 78% decrease in simple possession charges over 10 years. That make up 1% of all criminal charges that were laid in the province of Ontario. We are very rarely laying charges for simple possession. We are currently in a state of a de facto decriminalization. Oftentimes, when we're laying charges, they're necessary for simple possession. It could be, for instance, someone who's driving impaired with drugs and they're in possession of drugs. We need to seize that evidence and lay that charge for simple possession. It could be us targeting a drug trafficker and they're in possession of drugs. They might not have the indicia for trafficking, but they're in possession of drugs. We're probably going to lay a charge in that instance. And it's also, and this is important, and this is where there may be some misalignment, when we're interacting with a chaotic and disruptive drug user in the community who poses a threat to themselves and those around them, we need the tools, we need to be adequately equipped to keep you, the community, safe. In the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which we refer to as the CDSA, in 2018, there were some amendments that were made. It says that a police officer shall consider, when we're dealing with someone with simple possession, we shall consider to take no further action, to warn the individual, or to refer the individual to a program. It doesn't tell us that we shall do it, but it put it in the ether, it codified it in the CDSA that we shall consider it. And I just want to end by touching on a few points. Again, enforcement is not the solution. We understand that. We cannot and will not arrest our way out of this. But in the context in which I explained it to you tonight as it relates to organized crime and street gangs and the chaotic, disruptive user, it can be necessary. And just on a final note, just very quickly, I'm the co-chair of the Ontario Association Chiefs of Police Substance Advisory Committee, and I think that's important. I co-chaired with Deputy Chief Natalie Hiltz and Chief Tim Farquharson, and I share that with you because what I'm trying to explain as it relates to enforcement of organized crime and those who prey on the most vulnerable, that's not Ahmad Salhia's perspective, that's not my independent perspective. We work with leaders across the province, deputy chiefs across all of Ontario, and we are all aligned that enforcement is about targeting those who deserve it, those who prey on the vulnerable, and understanding our role in the continuum of care. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marianne Meed Ward. I'm the mayor of the city of Burlington, and I serve as chair of Ontario's Big City Mayors Caucus. We represent the 29 largest municipalities in Ontario, everything over 100,000 all the way up to the 3+ million here in the city of Toronto. And roughly 30% of the population of the country is in our membership. 70% of Ontario's population is represented by our caucus. In London, there were 39 overdoses in 24 hours amidst a suspected toxic drug supply. In Hamilton, a record 199 overdose calls in just 28 days. And in Sudbury, paramedic calls for suspected overdoses nearly doubled. These are the headlines about Ontario municipalities in just the last month. These are not isolated incidents. They're the warning signs of a crisis that's unfolding in communities across this province and across this country. And from where we sit at the municipal level, this crisis is impossible to ignore. And we wouldn't ignore it because we care deeply about the people that are involved in this crisis. Every day, our first responders are on the front lines of the drug toxicity crisis. Paramedics responding to overdoses, police responding to calls related to mental health and addiction. In Halton Region alone, 30% of all of their calls are mental health related, and that has doubled in the last 10 years. Outreach workers trying to connect people with services that simply aren't there, and community organizations doing everything that they can to keep people alive and supported. But what we're seeing is more than a public health challenge. It's a housing crisis, a mental health crisis, an addictions crisis, and a community safety crisis, all intersecting into one. 2 years ago, we recognized the scale of the problem as part of the Ontario's Big City Mayors and launched the solvethecrisis.ca campaign. It's still there. You can add your voice and your story to the campaign. Our goal was simple: call on the provincial and federal governments to take coordinated, urgent action to address the growing homelessness, mental health, and addictions emergency that is affecting communities of all sizes across Ontario. This is no longer just a big city crisis. Our requests were straightforward. First, we asked the province to appoint a single responsible ministry or minister with the authority and the resources to address the full spectrum of housing, mental health, addictions, and wraparound supports. Currently, there are upwards of 24 ministries who touch some aspect of this. Second, we called for a provincial task force to bring together municipalities, healthcare leaders, first responders, community organizations, and businesses to develop a coordinated Made in Ontario action plan. Third, we asked for tools and resources to help municipalities transition people living in encampments into safer and more appropriate supports. Fourth, we called for funding to fill the gaps in services community by community. And finally, we urged investment in 24/7 community hubs or crisis centers so that people in distress have somewhere to go besides emergency departments or jail. Last October, we added another urgent request: a winter homelessness response plan to ensure that people living outside had access to the services that they needed to stay alive, to stay safe during the coldest months of the year. In December 2025, after limited progress on these requests, our caucus asked the Government of Ontario to declare a state of emergency around homelessness driven by mental health and addictions. Some progress has been made. The province has committed $550 million towards homelessness and addiction recovery treatment hubs, or HEART hubs, and introduced additional investments in homelessness prevention programs. That's a welcome step, but it is so far away from what is needed. According to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, an estimated $11 billion over 10 years is required to address housing and homelessness, and an additional $2 billion to respond to encampments. And while that sounds like a lot, it takes 10 times more to deal with this reactively when the situation and people show up in our emergency centers and our jails because they have nowhere else to go. A proactive response is 1/10 of that cost. So these investments, while welcome and important, are not anywhere near to match the scale. Municipalities now account for the fastest and largest growing share of funding and support for homelessness in the province, a combined investment of over $4 billion, an extraordinary commitment from local governments, but we can't continue to do this. We're stepping up because we simply cannot look away from the human suffering happening in our communities. And I'll just leave you with a couple of the stories that we see in our community in the city of Burlington. We had a man who was in our library warming center, and he didn't want to leave at closing time because he had nowhere to go. So he begged the staff to call the police to have him arrested so he could go to jail and have a warm place to stay. We had an encampment in a wooded area near one of our malls. And during cooking and warming, the encampment was set on fire. And there were about 10 propane tanks on site that the first responders encountered while they were trying to put out the flames and make sure that they didn't explode. There was a couple, both of them employed, had a job, living in a tent in Bronte Creek Provincial Park because they couldn't afford rent. We don't know where they went when winter set in. This is what the crisis looks like at the human level. We can end this crisis in a country as prosperous, as wealthy as this country is, with all of the brilliant minds and compassionate people that we have wanting to solve this. We can do this. Municipalities are doing it. We're ready to do our part, but we cannot do this alone. We need all of us working together across sectors and across levels of government to solve the crisis. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. My name is Menzies, and I come from construction, not as a visitor, not as an academic, but as someone who's worn the boots, carried the tools, run the jobs, and felt the weight that comes with the work. Construction builds the world around us, roads, homes, schools, hospitals, but there's another side of this industry we don't talk about nearly enough. The injuries you can't see, the pain that doesn't show up on safety reports, the quiet struggles that too many workers carry alone. I started in construction young. Like many of us, I learned early that the job rewards toughness. You show up no matter how you feel, you work through pain, you don't complain. If something's wrong, you deal with it yourself or you bury it. For a long time, that culture defined me. In 2014, I started my own construction business. From the outside, things looked good, but behind the scenes, I was struggling with trauma, with pain, with addiction. Like many in our industry, opioids entered the picture not as a bad decision, but as a solution. Something to keep working, something to keep going. And that's one of the dangerous truths about opioids in construction. They don't always arrive as chaos. They often arrive as help. Help for injuries, help for exhaustion, help for getting through another brutal day, until they're not helping anymore. By 2018, my life had reached a breaking point. On March 18th of that year, I got sober. That decision didn't just save my life, it changed how I understood the cost of silence in our industry. Because when I started talking honestly about my struggles, something unexpected happened. Other workers started talking too. Quietly at first, then openly, then urgently. Men and women I had worked beside for years told me they were struggling with painkillers. Others admitted they were drinking heavily at night just to sleep. Some told me they had lost co-workers, good workers, to overdose, accidents, or suicide. What struck me the most was this: they didn't lack strength, they lacked support. That's where Hard Hat Support was born. Hard Hat Support isn't a program, and it's not therapy. It's a peer-led mutual aid initiative built by construction workers for construction workers. The idea is simple. People listen differently to someone who gets the job. We create spaces online and in person where tradespeople can talk openly about mental health, addiction, recovery, and pain without fear of judgment or job loss. We help people find resources, but more importantly, we remind them they're not alone. Because opioids don't thrive in connection, they thrive in isolation. In construction, isolation is everywhere. Long hours, early mornings, remote sites, a culture that tells you to suck it up, and chronic pain and easy access to prescriptions, and you have the perfect storm. Let me be clear about something important. This is not about blaming workers. This is about recognizing that a system built on speed, pressure, and silence makes people vulnerable. And when vulnerability meets opioids, lives can unravel quickly. Hard Hat Support exists to interrupt that process, to step in early before pain becomes dependency, before dependency becomes despair. We talk about real things: how to ask for help without risking your reputation, how to support a coworker who's struggling, how to come back to work after addiction or mental health challenges, how supervisors and companies can actually make job sites safer, not just physically, but psychologically. And we lead with lived experience. Because when I say I've been there, I mean it. I know what it feels like to be injured and afraid to slow down. I know what it feels like to rely on something just to function. And I know what it feels like to think that you're the only one struggling when you're not. One of the biggest myths about construction is that talking about mental health or addiction makes you weak. I've learned the opposite is true. Strength is telling the truth when it would be easier to hide. Strength is asking for help before everything falls apart. Strength is standing beside a coworker and saying, you don't have to do this alone. The battle against opioids will not be won by slogans or shame. It will be won by culture, change, one conversation, one job site, one hard hat at a time. That's the work I'm committed to. Not because it looks good on paper, because I buried friends, because I've answered messages from coworkers who didn't think they'd survive the night, because I've also watched people rebuild their lives when they finally seen a way through. If there's one thing I hope you take from this tonight is this: addicts and alcoholics are not disposable. Pain is not a personal failure, and help should never be harder to access than silence. Hard Hat Support is about reminding people that the same hands we use to build the world can also reach out to one another and hold on. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being a part of the change we so desperately need.
Hello everybody, my name is Chris Cull, and today I'm coming to you as one of the thousands of people who have experienced opioid addiction and going through my journey of what got me to standing in front of you today. My story begins with my dad. He was a paramedic. I live in Durham region. He was a paramedic there, and my mom moved to the States when I was 14, and so he raised me and he was my hero. In my teens, he was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disease, and he ended up losing his job, his license, his will to live. By 18, I was his caregiver. By 20, he was trying to take his own life on a fairly consistent basis, to the point where every single day I didn't know if I was going home to the worst day of my life. And to ride that line of stress for so long, it broke me. And when I was 22 years old, he didn't come home one night, and I went to school. He still wasn't back when I got home, so I called around to see where he could have been, and I found that he was at a pub the night before, so I called the closest hotel. They couldn't tell me if he was there, but asked me if it was a reason why he didn't want to harm himself, and my stomach dropped. I raced over there, and the paramedics had already arrived, and they were actually friends of my dad's, who I knew, and went in there, and yeah, we found him. I found him dead. I found him passed away in a hotel room, and that destroyed me. It destroyed me as a person. I was never the same after that, and I started using opioids. Started out with Percocets because it was the only thing that brought the stress level down to something manageable, where I didn't feel like my whole world was caving in every single day. But that escalated it into using from a handful of Percocets a day to 580 milligram Oxycontins a day for 2 years. He left me a mortgage-free home, 6 figures in the bank, so I would be set for life. I lost the home. I spent the 6 figures on drugs. I lost a girlfriend I thought I was going to marry, and I lost everything that meant anything to me. And not knowing what else to do, I had heard of methadone. I didn't know anything about it, but I'm like, if it's some way out of this, I'm going to go for it. And initiated on that, and then that was its own journey. I ended up going 2 years without heat or hot water because I had no gas in my home, and my only entertainment was like what I got out from the library on my bus rides home from the methadone clinic. And one day I came across a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Dr. Viktor Frankl, which that changed my whole frame of thinking about my life, and then taught me how to find meaning in my suffering. So I started to figure out kind of what was going to come after my opioid addiction. And it wasn't until I figured out what was after, because getting off was just the Mount Everest. I couldn't climb that to save my life. But once I figured out what was going to be after, it just turned into a small step to something bigger. So I came up with the idea that I was going to ride a bike across Canada and film a documentary on the impacts of the opioid crisis across the country. Now that's rich to have that dream when you're 139 pounds, stealing your food to eat, and you have no experience in film, journalism, public speaking, public relations. I hadn't rode a bike in 10 years. And I'm on the bus ride home not knowing where my next meal is coming from. But eventually I kind of hit a point where I realized the only time I was happy was when I was thinking about what that would be like. And then it finally clicked. I'm like, what would it take to do that? And then I started using the internet and the library to get every book I could find on everything I wanted to do, and went into my doctor. I was on 120 milligrams of methadone, and that took about 1.5 years to start working my way down off. But in that whole time, I was going to the library and just working like I was obsessed with what this was going to be. I got it, and then finally on January 27th of 2014, I walked out of the methadone clinic the last day. Ironically, my first day off of opioids in nearly a decade, and a lady called me a junkie while standing in front, and I didn't react, but I'm like, you are the reason why I'm going to go and do this. And so I ended up riding a bike from Victoria, BC to St. John's, Newfoundland, going town to town, coast to coast, talking to thousands of people about what was going on with them or their communities. Part of the film was sharing my own journey, and then part of it all was going out and doing all the crazy stuff that I used to dream of doing that I couldn't do when I couldn't travel. So I hit golf balls off the mountains in BC, jumped out of an airplane over Montreal, and so forth, and made it across Canada, and that opened up a lot of doors for me. And I ended up doing a second bike ride to raise awareness on opioid use disorder in 2016. But then that led to, I didn't realize I was the only person who had physically went town to town, coast to coast, studying the problem. And then that led to doing some consulting for federal health ministers, which then opened further doors to kind of where I'm at now in life. So my day job being is I work on the crisis intervention team in the emergency department in Oshawa. I literally barreled here after my shift today to be here. So, but I'm a motivational speaker. I've had the privilege of traveling the world and speaking in front of thousands of people, which is a dream that I could never imagine it would turn into. I was recently the face of the CAMH No One Left Behind campaign, which raised over $600 million for the CAMH Foundation. I'm on Ontario Health's Substance Use Disorder Provincial Advisory Table and helping set up all the integrated care pathways for the emergency departments and develop the whole peer support program that's being taught through those integrated care pathways. I'm helping develop Canada's first national guidance on artificial intelligence within mental health and substance use care. I'm the chair of the Canadian Civil Society Working Group on International Drug Policy, and had the privilege of representing Canada at the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and just got home last week, which was it was the dream. And lastly, I was last year appointed as the Canadian representative to the World Health Organization's Strategic and Technical Advisory Group on Mental Health, Neurological, and Substance Use Conditions, where I'm the chair of their lived experience working group, and I have to pitch the Director General in June about standing up a global advisory group that's going to inform that senior leadership from the lived experience perspective. And I'm also helping develop their AI strategy as well. Now, I share all this not to necessarily point out kind of how far I've personally come in my journey, but more to show you just how far the people we serve can go from a point they thought was the end. And when I'm sitting back and trying to think about what would be the best kind of message for this particular audience, and knowing that the particular disciplines and background, all that I can really say is thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, to have this conversation, and it's meaningful to you, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Thank you for being people for what you do for people like me. I am in the positions I am today because of people like you. And the more discussions we can have, and the more openness, and the more we can all work together, the world is, in our communities, is very much a better place for us being a part of it. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. A big round of applause for our talkers. Wow. I was taking notes. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Jennifer Brasch, who reminds us that every death is a tragedy, but this is also a treatable condition, and that we have the social determinants of health at play. Followed by Suzanne Obiorah, who highlighted that there is a fracture in our social contract, and challenged us all to think about how we define and talk about safety. Safety for who? Thank you, Rennie Linklater. Rennie, you highlighted the different journeys of pain and how we are living through a larger global crisis in humanity. Ahmad Salhia, who spoke to enforcement and the evolution of it, not targeting the end user, and a larger look at systems. Mayor Marianne Meed Ward, who spoke to housing, mental health, addictions, safety, these issues coming together as a larger crisis, and that it's no longer just a big city issue, but it is an issue that cities are taking on and looking for greater support from government and the people who make up cities and communities. Scott Menzies, construction builds the world around us. It's just so powerful to highlight that. I think so often we're not actually taking a moment to look at the workers, the people who build our communities and cities. Sharing that opioids for many arrive as help, and that workers are lacking the support, and that opioids and the crisis is thriving in isolation. And Chris Cole, you thanked us, but I thank you and the other talkers. Your talk, it was all of these takeaways together in your own personal story, and to think the power of a book from the library, and also the power of you and your bicycle sharing your story town by town, and leading the dream, as you say, and leading this work for Canada. Again, thank you so much to our talkers tonight. I'm now going to invite our speakers to stand up and head out so they can grab a drink and make their way to reception first. So if you could all, take a stand. And as they do that, I'm going to tell our audience a bit more about what we have coming up at the Walrus. If you enjoyed tonight's Walrus Talks, we have another one coming up on Wednesday, April 1st. That's next week. Join us in Saskatoon or online for the Walrus Talks Wildfires. 7 health, climate, and policy experts will come together to explore the impact of the wildfire crisis. And that's not all. On Thursday, April 9th, join us in Toronto or online for the Walrus Talks Power and Belonging, which in many ways connects to the talks this evening, where we're going to be exploring how communities and individuals can reclaim power to make a difference. Keep an eye on your inbox. You'll receive a follow-up email from the Walrus. And the best way to stay in touch with us and to not miss out on future events and news and stories is to opt in for our free newsletter in that email. This event has been recorded for video, and we will post it in the Walrus Talks video room on our website at thewalrus.ca/events. Read the Walrus. We have a special offer for those of you with us in person, a full year subscription to the Walrus. That's 8 issues delivered right to your door for just $25, which is a great deal. We have a table in the lobby. Visit the Walrus table, and the team there will set you up. You can also read the Walrus online for free. We do not have a paywall, and this is made possible by people like you. The Walrus is a registered charity, and that's why we can do this. So with your support, we can ensure that everyone has access to independent Canadian fact-based journalism. You can donate to the Walrus at thewalrus.ca/support or come by the table in the lobby. All gifts of $20 or more are eligible for a charitable tax receipt. For those of you who are joining us in person, you may have noticed that there are some prompt questions on the screen behind me. We have a podcast pop-up booth where we encourage you to share your thoughts on what you learned this evening. You can also get a photo taken. Join us just outside on your way out next to the merchandise table. Thanks again to everyone at Addictions and Mental Health Ontario for making tonight's talks possible. A big thank you to our national sponsors, Air Canada, the Belonging Forum, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, and RBC. And thank you for spending time with the Walrus, in person and online, and being a part of the Walrus community. Less scrolling and more understanding. Have a great evening, everyone.